All right, everybody. The Fantasy Football Key is back and wanted to start off with something a little fun here. I got a trophy that I'm going to do a fresh unboxing for. I've got a league where I'm the commissioner and I've won it before, but the catch with this league is first place prize gets a pair of shoes, any shoes that they want, as long as it is within the amount that all the buy-ins added up to. And there's no second place prize. If you ain't first or last, no one's getting a partial pair of shoes or some socks or some slides or anything like that, right? So if you win, you get the sneakers. If not, you don't. Oh well. But it was a really close one. Really, the quarterback injuries cost the other team. So I got lucky, I'll say. But I will take a win. A win is a win. And these are the Air Jordan Pinnacle white ones. And I've wanted these for a long time. Got a little bag with it. But man, these are nice. It's got the diamond cut inside. You can't really tell the texture, but it's like an ostrich type texture, leather all around, and 24K gold on the eyelets. This is really nice. Can't wait to show the league and can't wait for the next year. I'll just do a quick little view of what they look like when it's not as blurry. Not too bad. I like these. All right. So that's enough of that. Really, what I wanted to talk about today was some strategy for the off season. I mean, this is going to be, it always feels like a long off season until it's not, and we're back in the season and we're just ready to go again. I know all of us are junkies when it comes to this Dynasty football. So wanted to kind of touch on some points that I thought might help folks throughout the off season. One of the things that I think is the most common is the league goes quiet in the off season. I mean, I don't want to call it the off season. I just want to call it the non-point scoring season, right? But at the same time, it is what it is. There's no points going on, so folks are just not really paying attention as much. But right now, actually, in January 19th, we do still have playoff games coming up. We've got the Super Bowl in the next month coming up, right? Use those as points to just keep the hype going in the chat, whether it's, throwing in highlights from this weekend's upcoming games. If you're trying to get off of Mark Andrews and he comes back in this playoffs here and does something, you can trade him away, right? Same with Isaiah Likely. They're going to be probably in a timeshare next season. And instead of worrying about what that is, make some room for the upcoming rookies that you have on your team, trade away some of those questionable assets and find a way to get some value on your team that won't depreciate, because those draft picks are just going to keep accruing in value, and that's going to be putting you in a really good spot. But when you don't have anyone else that's active in the league, it's just really tough to make any moves. And I think keeping that activity going at the start of the year, that can help throughout the offseason, right? So once we have Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowls come up, once we have the Combine, show some Twitter hype, some stats, put that into the league chat. Keep the energy going. Don't feel like you're doing too much just because you're trying to keep some energy going. I mean, I would hope people in my leagues were always trying to keep a conversation going, because that's good for the overall league health and makes it a lot more fun. We've got the draft. That's going to be such low-hanging fruit. At that point, it'll be April, right? So that's when it really starts to get quiet, from May until really redraft season. So that's all the way through August, right? So, try to get some energy going early on. Make sure your league knows what players are available on your team. Make sure that you're able to put yourself in a position where if someone does have a thought of, hey, I want to make a move, they're thinking of you because they know you're going to be active. Because more than likely, there's going to be a lot of inactive folks in off season. So for the ones that are wanting to make moves, you want to make sure that it's your team that's getting better, along with that other team. But if it's just 2 teams out of 12 getting better, you can live with that versus other teams getting better without you being involved, right? So do what you can to try to spark the trade market. And with that, some of the things you do need to be focused on is getting rid of some of those older players. A lot of these teams will be having some shifts going on, but with this rookie draft being so deep at wide receiver, a lot of these aging wide receivers, you got to be looking to move on from at some point, see what type of deals you can get, even if it's for early seconds or something like that, for those receivers that are 31 plus. You're really going case by case on that player to see if that's a good long-term investment, right? So you really want to try to make some moves, see what you can do to get some those older players off of your team. That number, that age range for running backs is much lower. Really it's just the second contract. Once they're on the second contract, it's, you need them to continue to have good years stacked upon each other for that value to remain the same. We've seen a guy like James Conner where the value will really fluctuate. It will always tend towards trending downwards, but if he's playing well in season, then it'll go up in season, and once that off season hits, it goes back down because that uncertainty strikes back once again. So and really when it comes to the running backs, there's not a few that are must holds anyway. What I've seen over these past few years is, due to the attrition at running back, you can survive, with your roster, by not having a lot of the dependency of your winning or losing being on the running backs to begin with. Because if you've got room to add running backs because you don't have these must hold players, if you have the flexibility because you've traded away a high end guy for a draft pick in the future, so you now have that open roster spot and you can hold on to someone who may only be starting this year because of an injury, like a Gus Edwards, but you can make sure they're in your lineup and at the running back position there with just those injury replacements. So running back, receiver, I feel like those are positions where we kind of have a good feel for the age cutoffs. Tight end has been a little bit longer, but there's definitely some guys out there that you want to try to move on from, like a Darren Waller. It's less about age; it's more about the injury history with him. But even a Kelsey, I don't think you'll get full on rejections when you're asking to put out trades for Kelsey, but people understand that the clock's ticking on him, so the value's starting to dip. So try to get an offer out the door for Kelsey, someone who's a contender and wants to make a final season push with him. Maybe he's got 2 seasons left. But again, once this draft hits, if they do, like in the Dane Brugler mock, and take a Jatavian Sanders, that's going to really put a dent in the value of a tight end like Kelsey, or any of these guys who might have a young up and coming running tight end come in behind them. And it's aside of getting rid of some of the older players, try to assess what are the tiers of draft picks that you really like, and try to see if you can get some trades done within those tiers. Uh, for the first round, it's still early. We need landing spots, right? I would say last year the big cutoff was 106. That was where JSN was. Obviously in hindsight things are a little bit different, um, but you were still getting two of the big quarterbacks. You're getting the two big running backs in that range, and what we thought was the top receiver at the time. Definitely were at least a few other great names in that draft. But for this year, 2024, there's definitely a big six. I would say that goes beyond six right off the bat, even at this point. If you feel confident in Jaden Daniels getting top 10 draft capital after that Heisman season, then I would say there's three definitive quarterbacks that are going to be first rounders early. So that's a floor of three in that very beginning of the draft. I would say there's a minimum one major receiver. I'm confident in Malik Neighbors as well on top of the Marvin Harrison Jr. So that's five at minimum. And I have to throw Brock Bowers in there. For me, that's a solid six right there. Rome Odunze, depending on landing spot for some of these other guys, draft capital, could be others in that mix. I would feel okay with that top seven because, again, once you're in that range, then you have a little bit more flexibility to trade, move up a little bit higher once we're on the clock, or we've at least seen some landing spots. So, that's the first round tier. But then I would say it's so deep into the second round. We just did a mock draft, and there we had quite some depth in that class. I would say the 15th pick. I feel good about players all the way to really that whole second round. It just depends on where guys fall. It could be really nice. After pick 17, I'm kind of at a point where there's only running backs remaining that I want, but at that point, basically only one running back would have been taken. So there's just so many options, even at the beginning of the third round or end of the second round. But yeah, see what you can get done. Identify what tiers you've got guys in, and go ahead and try to make some trades to get some draft picks within those tiers. Do some other things that I've done that have been successful for me is making sure that I've got my roster construction in order. I want to make sure that I don't have too many players that I'm never going to use. And I also like to make sure that I have room for my future draft picks. I will look at how many draft picks I have, count that number of draft picks. And I actually don't include fifth round, fourth round in that number, but I'll count how many first, second, third round picks I have. And I will then, if that's in 2026, 2025, I will take that number and I will cross out that amount of players from my current roster. And, I have to be able to look at those players and say, hey, are these must hold players? Or can I just cut them? If I can cut them for someone with more upside while waivers are still open, sure, I can do that. But if there are players that have value, then obviously that's who I want to try to trade first. I don't necessarily just want to make room by trading away good players to make room for my draft picks. I want to first try to get rid of some of these other guys, even if it's consolidating a couple of players that may actually be good, usable in the flex, whatever that may be. But for whatever reason, maybe you have a ton of draft picks and you just can't hold your tight end four, and you don't want to just drop them for nothing, right? But making sure that you understand your format. Don't have too many players that you can't use. Again, when you're holding a future upside wide receiver, it's going to be hard to add that running back who's getting the spot start for this week. It's going to be hard to want to trade away a 4th-round pick for a spot start of a running back when you also still have to cut a player that you've been waiting for them to develop, right? So being out ahead of that, making sure that you don't have too many players that you just probably aren't going to use. I'll give some young receivers 2 seasons, but that's kind of a stretch. I happen to have my roster construction in line in a lot of leagues where I can pull that off. But if you haven't shown me anything in that first year, it's usually time to move on. I would say like a Marvin Mims, right? He flashed. There's enough of a change going on in Denver since they had the new head coach. Year 1, the head coach has what he has that year, but year 2 is when he can really put a stamp on what he's got going there. So, maybe you give that type of a player another year, right? Give them 2 years, but Sky Moore type has to, I dropped him early in the season, but that's one where last offseason, we're leaving 2022 and Sky Moore hasn't done anything except for in the playoffs of the real NFL where he actually had a touchdown in the Super Bowl. But realistically, if I could have sold him, traded him in the offseason, that would have been the better move while he still had some value. Because these NFL teams, they have to move on. They have to make business decisions as well. And it's really one of those things where you don't want to be dropping someone that you spent a 2nd-round pick on for nothing if you could at least get a 3rd back, So doing what you can to clean out your roster, make sure you don't have too much excess. In general, if it's a Superflex league, I want to have my quarterback 1 and quarterback 2 both be quarterback 1 caliber players. And your QB3, you want to hopefully have someone that can get the job done during a injury or bye week. I would think, 4 quarterbacks, you can be in a good spot there. I've seen that having 5 is a pretty sweet spot. It allows for being able to trade and not feeling that you're too thin. But just depends on how deep your rosters are. You want to be able to have enough depth there while also knowing that you can't just start all these quarterbacks. You need to fill out the rest of your roster. And ultimately, you're going to want to start finding ways to get some of the higher end producers. So if you can consolidate and combine players into some of those really impactful players, that type of move makes sense. So see what you can do this offseason to just help make your team better, help engage the league, make sure that you are set up going into this draft and going into the next offseason. Find ways to, not just completely check out, but look in at your roster, use the playoffs that are going on now to your advantage, and continue to have fun with it. Season's not really over. There's really no off season. Dynasty is always happening at all times. So make sure that you're not the one who's missing out on making a move while your league mates are. If you got any other suggestions for off-season moves, let me know. I'd love to hear it. This has been the Fantasy Football Key. Appreciate you guys, and I'll talk to you soon. All right, bye.